pleasure to welcome you to another of our Latin American briefing series of public talks on current affairs in Latin America. Tonight's talk is made possible by the Tinker visiting professor down at the University of Chicago, and quite directly by our Tinker visiting professor Alma Guillermoprieto. Ms. Guillermoprieto is a journalist. She has written books about samba schools in Rio de Janeiro, about the politics of television in Latin America, about the politics of emerging democracies and authoritarianism in the 1990s, and a memoir on dancing in Cuba in the 1960s. She's teaching a course on contemporary journalism and media in Latin America. Tonight's guest, Fernando Chamorro, has also spoken to students in that course. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome Mr. Chamorro to the University of Chicago. He's a journalist and director of CIMCO, Center for Communications Research in Nicaragua. And he's also from a remarkable family, not the only remarkable family, but one of many families in Nicaragua that has had many members prominent in politics, and at times even on the opposite side of the fence of party politics. His late father, Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, was a journalist and newspaper editor, instrumental in the opposition to the dictatorship of Somoza. His mother, Chamorro, took up his father's legacy, directed La Prensa during the 1980s, and in 1990 was elected president of Nicaragua, defeating Daniel Ortega and the Sandinista party. Mr. Chamorro, during the 1980s, was editor-in-chief at Barricada, the Sandinista party official newspaper. In 1994, after the Sandinista party narrowed its politics, he left Barricada, and he's been an independent journalist since then, and notable for introducing new styles of television journalism in Nicaragua. He's also recently been the subject of attention in the United States press because of police raids on his research institute and allegations that these are motivated by exposés of fraud that he and other journalists have undertaken. So it's my great pleasure to welcome both of our speakers. And tonight we've set it up not for a lecture but for a conversation. After which I hope all of us will join in asking speakers questions. Once again, we started late, so we'll make every effort to be a little bit briefer tonight so that those of you who have appointments in the evening can get them.
Carlos Fernando Chamorro, you've already heard, and he may be already very well known to many of you. He just visited with my class, talking about his quite remarkable life. And at one point, one of the questions was simply, what does it feel like to be a part of history? Because indeed, it's not only Carlos Fernando who has lived through the tumultuous various stages of Nicaraguan history, but his family, his parents, he himself, his siblings. And because I think he is by nature, one of the fairest people I know, he really does have an ability to tell the story of Nicaragua from a almost weirdly triple-sided perspective. It says he almost couldn't help himself. He has to be fair. He has to view the other side of the question, perhaps because his own family has taken sides so vehemently in the past, and he himself has taken sides so vehemently in the past. For the last 15 years, ever since he was expelled, I think is the right word, from the newspaper that he founded and then directed ever since 1994. Carlos Fernando has led an approximately normal life. That is, he has not been a part of the revolutionary movement. He has been engaged in changing the world. There have been no traumatic events in his family. He's married, he's raised 3 children, and he has had a weekly television program, which again has been an observation post for him. There is this cyclical character to Central American history, which was very much reflected in 100 Years of Solitude. The way that because essential isolations keep getting repeated over and over again, we see the same events over and over again. And this is almost eerily true in Carlos Fernando's case. His father was assassinated. This assassination did lead to the first uprising that gave momentum to the Sandinista National Liberation Front struggle over Somoza. When the Sandinistas triumphed, Carlos Fernando then became the director of the newspaper. Then he was ousted by the Sandinistas from that newspaper. And then, to our astonishment, after he had been leading this normal life for 15 years, those of us who were living outside of Nicaragua suddenly found out that yet again a Chamorro, a journalist, Chamorro, had had his journalistic enterprise attacked directly by the ruling, the president of Nicaragua, almost directly. And that, in fact, the aggression, the official rhetoric against him had been pumped up so high, some of us actually worried about your physical safety. This led to a kind of outbreak of international protest. There were thousands of signatures on letters of protest directly addressed to the Nicaraguan government, and the tension has slightly receded. We can now see that whole assault against you and against your program and against Cinco, the kind of thinking tank organization that Carlos Fernando and other colleagues lead, in the context of Daniel Ortega's push to arrange the Constitution somehow so that he can re-elect himself for the 3rd time. 4th time? 1, 2, 3, 4th time.
Well, yeah, to be president for the 3rd time.
To be president for a 4th time. And so, again, in this cyclical way, we see that there are now 4 countries in Latin America that have decided that this is a viable goal, whereas it used to be an unmentionable kind of goal, to re-elect themselves, to have themselves re-elected over and over again. So that is the context in which we welcome Pedro Fernando Chamorro here on a Wednesday. Can you tell us what happened last Monday?
Okay, thank you, Alma, and thank you to the Center of Latin American Studies and the audience to make it possible for me to be here at the University of Chicago. Last Monday, we were taken by surprise by a resolution of the Supreme Court of Justice of Nicaragua, not even the Supreme Court of Justice, one segment of the court integrated basically by Sandinista magistrados. And I made this explanation because in Nicaragua, well, if you look at the Supreme Electoral Council or the other powers like the Supreme Council for Elections, you have branches of political parties. So we talk about the magistrados sandinistas and the magistrados liberales. It's not that they are from a political origin or that they belong to a party once in the past. It's that they act as if they were party members. So they got together and they came out with a resolution basically saying that Article 147 of our Constitution is inconstitutional. The article established that in Nicaragua, there is no, the president can be re-elected for one period, and that there is no possibility of consecutive re-election. So, re-election, I think we have to look at according to the cultural and historical connotation of each country. I will not say the same things about re-election in Nicaragua that in Brazil or in Venezuela or in other countries, but for us, re-election has a lot to do with our own history and the problem of the Somoza dynasty for 45 years, 1934 until 1979. Most of the problem of Somoza was not only about authoritarianism and repression, but the fact that Somoza wanted to stay in power, changing the constitution, transferring power, well, to his sons, etc. So when the Sandinista revolution in 1987 discussed in the new constitution about re-election, well, the Congress was controlled by the FSLN, 65% of congressmen. They decided not to say anything about re-election. So Ortega was candidate in 1990 as president for re-election, and he lost. In 1995, the constitution was reformed. For the first time, I think, there was a balance, there was a political balance in the country to decide about this issue. And this is what the constitution decided. No more consecutive re-election. Re-election is good only for one period. Now, if that constitutional precedent is to be changed, it has to go to the National Assembly. In Nicaragua, we don't have referendums or big consultations to make constitutional changes. Changes have to be done with the majority of votes in Congress. And Ortega, since he came to power, he has been pushing to get that majority, this two-thirds majority in Congress, so to change the constitution. Because he has not been able to put together the votes, now they came out with this maneuver by which basically the one branch of the Supreme Court of Justice is basically substituting the National Assembly, reforming the Constitution without having the authority to do that. Basically, this is what they did. Now, for Nicaraguan experts on constitutional issues, they say this is a coup d'etat. This is a substitution of parliament by, not by the Supreme Court of Justice, but by a group of people who did this operation in secrecy. Basically, the way they did it was like this. On Thursday, Ortega and 106 mayors, because Ortega, it was too ugly for him to do that himself alone. So they said it's not only that he's claiming for his right, but also the mayors. They introduced a resource under the Electoral Council, complaining that they cannot go for re-election. The Supreme Electoral Council said, this is not my authority to decide about this, and he sent it to the Court of Justice. And on Monday, breaking all the records of time, we had this result on Monday afternoon.
But tell him how it happened. He's too fair. Tell him dirty backstage.
Okay, people said, so what happened with the other magistrados? What did the magistrados liberales, who share a big part of the problem of Nicaragua? Why they didn't oppose that vote? Well, because at 1 o'clock there was a blackout in the Supreme Court of Justice, and the magistrados liberales, they went home. So at that time, at 1:30, behind their doors, they received the notification to go to the meeting. They were not there, so they called magistrados sustitutos. They called another magistrados sandinistas to get together there. I mean, all this is public. This is part of the Nicaragua soap opera. It's quite. I mean, everybody knows exactly how it was done. The day after, the president came on national television, and he was basically making fun of him and saying, "Well, what's the problem? I mean, if I can go for re-election, I mean, are you afraid of competing with me in a new election?" And what is the problem? The problem is not re-election or not re-election. In Nicaragua today, the problem is who counts the votes. What is the credibility of the Supreme Electoral Council to organize an election after having fraud in the municipal elections last year that created big problems for the country.
It just seems really so cooperative or farce-like. In Mexico, we had a famous election back in the year 1988 where the computer counting system collapsed, and when the lights came back on again, there was a new president. But it's never been quite like turning off the lights in the actual electoral court of justice, and then sending the liberal judges home so that the Sandinista judges can get together and declare the election. It was really an astonishing feat, but it's at the same time so obvious, so transparent, that it makes me ask, how does somebody like Ortega win with these kinds of tactics? How does he continue to be in power? What is his basis for support? How did this man, who even his peers do not consider to be the brightest of the lot, how did he emerge as the leader of the Sandinista party and then as president?
I think Ortega has been persistent in his pursuit of power, and he has been able to keep control of the party. This is the story of a collective leadership that was able to direct a revolution, and then it evolved into a traditional story of a personal caudillo, that is Ortega, that ended up concentrating all the power, the legal seats of the power of the party. Ortega has been presidential candidate in 84, 90, 96, 2001, 2006. He's the only candidate that the party has ever had. And he won the presidency for the second time in 2006, having less percentage of votes than when he lost in the previous time. How is that possible? We, according to our constitutional reform of 95, we started the rule for the second round. And the rule was established that a candidate needed to get more than, it was 45% of the vote. In the year 2000, Ortega made a political arrangement with President Arnoldo Alemán, a very corrupt liberal, which in Nicaraguan terms means more center-right president. And this agreement was turned into a constitutional reform that changed the electoral law and established something that I bet is unique in Latin America. That you can win the presidency in the first round only with 35% of the vote if you have 5% above number 2. This was like a tailored, shirt for Ortega's political base, because the Prensa's political base is always 36, 38, 39, 40. Why Alemán agreed on that? Because he thought the Liberal Party was always going to defeat the Prensa, because the Liberal Party has won with majorities of 50, 51, 53% in previous elections, and because he got something in return from Ortega, which was immunity, so when he will be former president. So Ortega won the presidency on the first round in 2006 with 38% of the vote, because the other parties of the opposition split in 3 groups. One got 28, the other 26, the other 8. The 3 together had 62% of the vote, but Ortega won in the first round. If he had gone to the second round, he would have lost. Now, the story that we were talking about, the Supreme Court of Justice, this is the daily politics in Nicaragua. The story is how a minority party, which is very strong, has control on all the state apparatus, and is able to govern like if it was a majority, but it's not. This is not Chavez, this is not Correa, this is not Evo Morales that have come to power with massive support beyond 50%, 54%. This is more the minority group with this capability of manipulating the law and the state. With the complicity many times with sectors of the opposition like Alemán.
I can understand his making an alliance with Alemán that is favorable, because Alemán's government was so corrupt that he needed to have an ally in power no matter what. But what is his hold over the rest of his own party? Why does the party consistently put him forward?
I think Ortega has been instrumental expelling people that became a threat for his leadership. And those who challenged him internally have tried to build other political alternatives outside the party. One important thing, the party is rooted in history of a revolution. The symbols of the party are very, very powerful and very strong for the mass of supporters, mostly people from the barrios and from the countryside. So there is a political base which is captive under Ortega leadership. And the FSLN today, I tend to say that it looks more like what the PRI used to be at one point. It looks more like a corporativist party that is not integrated only by working class people origin, but there's a business group within the party, and there's a sector of professionals, and there are sectors of peasants, and different groups. And it's basically a political machinery that is very efficient in terms of promoting clientelism, and now they are in power, and therefore it is stronger in terms of capability of keeping the discipline. But at the same time, the other part of the story is the failure of the democratic left or the modern right, too.
Can you say more about that? What could the dissidents within the Sandinista party have done differently?
I think the dissidents within the Sandinista party, I was part of that movement until '94, and then I decided not to be part of party politics anymore and concentrate myself only in journalism. I think they have had good leaders in different moments of time, but they have not been able to organize a party. They have not been able to organize a network. I think they have seen of what we could call postmodernity. You don't need a political party. Yes, you need a political party to mobilize your people, to organize your political demands. And the leaders have been people that at one point have been number one in the polls, but without having a political party. Ortega has always had a political party.
Could you talk then about why it's necessary for him to bring his wife into his power circle? Rosario Murillo has been married to Daniel Ortega now for 35 years,
Yeah.
something like that. She was married previously, he was not. They have several children together, and she has never held any political position, ever. Can you explain her importance and why he should find her necessary?
I think there is why does he find her necessary is the result of a series of events that led to I think Daniel presenting Rosario and himself as a kind of a political duo. In 1998, he was accused of rape and violation by his stepdaughter, Soy America Rio, Narvaez.
Rosario's daughter.
Right. And, well, many people, she was very convincing. It was a very dramatic testimony. Although some people would say this is politically motivated, well, she had a lot of elements that would make her story credible. Now, what happened? The political class looked somewhere else and said, well, we don't want to use this accusation to kill Ortega politically. And Rosario came out defending him. He never defended himself. She came out basically saying, my daughter is crazy. My daughter is completely out of her mind, and this is just a fabrication. Then Ortega was cleaned up by the judicial system controlled by himself, but I think she saved his political head. From then on, in the next electoral campaign that he lost in 2001, Rosario came out and she became the head of communication of the party in the campaign. 2006, again, she was appointed now campaign manager. And when they won the election, Ortega declared that he was going to share power with Rosario. So they do have some kind of an understanding about her role. He called her the de facto prime minister, and she's in charge of different important political and social aspects of the party. Now, this has excluded completely the possibility of other natural leaders of the Frente to compete for the leadership or to occupy any kind of prominent role in the party. So the old FSLN that used to be collective leadership now ended up some kind of a family party under their control.
When are the elections supposed to take place now that the lights have gone out?
Next elections?
Yeah.
2011. November 2011.
And Daniel Ortega will run for the elections with...
He's already in campaign. He was already in campaign before what happened on Monday.
So what does Nicaragua look like right now? What about the Nicaraguan economy? What's going to be some goals?
Okay, one comment previously about what is the resonance of what happened on Monday. People are saying, well, this is a challenge for the OAS. This is a challenge for the OAS because there's a rupture of the constitutional order in Nicaragua. What the OAS is going to do? The OAS intervenes in Honduras when there is a coup d'etat, but the democratic charter established several issues about breaking the constitutional order in the country. I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be very complex and very complicated for the OAS. But the Nicaraguan opposition will try to fight that battle in the OAS. Now, I think the most important thing is to fight that battle in the country, whether they will be able or not to mobilize people against what the Supreme Court of Justice did and the economic and social issues. Now, Nicaragua continues to be one of the poorest countries in Latin America, competing with Honduras and Haiti. Half of the population is under the poverty line, 50% of the population, 17% living in extreme poverty. You don't change that situation from one day to another. It requires sustainability in terms of long-run economic policies. Ortega came to power and he hasn't done anything differently from what previous government had done. He had to sign an agreement with the IMF because it requires the IMF to give some kind of a green light so that the international community will continue cooperating with Nicaragua. Nicaragua is highly dependent on foreign aid. Now we have not only this traditional dependence on foreign aid, but we have a new partner in foreign aid, which is Venezuela. And basically Ortega's economic policy has been, to keep the basic macroeconomic balances on track so that the business community will find, okay to work, and to take advantage of the cooperation from Venezuela to organize some social assistance programs that are oriented into a kind of a clientelistic framework. Programs like Hambre Cero, Zero Hunger, which is different from what Lula did in Brazil. Programs that they call Calles para el Pueblo, or Usura Cero. It's a sort of an inspiration of what Chavez is doing in Venezuela with Divisiones, but with the smallest budget, outside the national budget, and this money and these programs are being used by the party and are being administered in a private framework.
You've called Chavez Ortega's rich uncle,
Yeah.
who makes his tenure possible. But it seems to me that you have Chavez looking to the Cubans, to bring in Cuban doctors to make his continuation in government possible, and then in turn Chavez provides the same services to Ortega, which doesn't still add up to a majority. So if what you said before about 28% and 23% and 8%, the opposition getting 28, 23, and 8% of the vote respectively, they can still defeat Ortega. Do you think he can win the next time?
I mean, if the opposition is capable of organizing an alliance, they can easily defeat Ortega if there is a credible electoral body. Now, we had the trauma of the fraud last year. That's a big, big problem. Chavez's influence in Nicaragua is, you know, people in Nicaragua are very thankful about Venezuelan cooperation. Venezuela represents about 8% of our gross national product, almost $500 million every year. What is the problem? It doesn't go through the national budget. It goes through private channels. So when Ortega talks about changing the model of neoliberalism, it's not changing anything. What he's doing is he's privatizing foreign aid to create his own parallel set of private business, which are run by his son, by Rafael Ortega. Actually, he's his brother of Soy America, the one who accusing of abuses. And he's creating a parallel network of business. If Chavez would not be there, yes, Ortega would be in power. He's not in power because of Chavez. I think Chavez allows him to have this kind of flexibility, or what I would call, I don't know what the word is in English, voluntarismo, in order to do politics from the state without having to be worried about the budget.
Which is precisely what Chavez does. Yes. So is there a real alliance? Are we talking again about the Alma as a functioning alliance that can change the balance of power in Latin America?
I don't think so. I think Alma, which is the Alianza Bolivariana de la América, or Alternativa Bolivariana de la América, I think Alma basically is a coalition of Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, in which basically we are recipients of Venezuelan aid. But Alma doesn't really mean an alternative economic model. You know, we are beneficiaries of Venezuelan aid. That's fine. That's not a problem, absolutely. And Honduras was taking advantage of that. Mel Zelaya, that's what it was doing with Chavez. But the influence of Alma, in my opinion, you know, beyond the political rhetoric and beyond the influence that it could have in the discussion in the OMS or in some issues in the United Nations, is mostly restricted to these countries that are participating in this, in this alliance with Chavez. I don't think Alba has much influence in Brazil or in Argentina or in Chile or in other countries, which may have a bilateral relationship with Chavez trying to take advantage of this sort of gold mine that he has with the price of oil. How long this is going to last?
Well, the price of oil is not stable. So it's not something that will pay us in count on. So we have this economy that's sort of not anything that you can win an election on. You have a clientelist system. You have international support and financial backing. And then you have the press, and what the press can do in this coming election. What has Ortega's attitude towards the press been?
Ortega feels that he has full control of all the state apparatus, and he has capacity to cooptation of political parties, but he faces in the press and in some sectors of civil society and what he perceives as another sector of the opposition and the enemy. And he has been very confrontative with the press. I worked as a journalist in the previous 3 governments, including my mother's government in early 90s, Alma's government, and Bolaño's government. At that point, I was not working. I was working as an independent journalist, and I tried to establish the same critical standard, dealing with all this government. I had conflicts with all of them. When you criticize them strongly, when you raise issues like lack of transparency, corruption, etc., you have problems and conflicts, normal conflicts in a democracy. When I did the same thing with Ortega, what I faced was a very strong campaign of personal attack and accusations. That was not spontaneous. It was something that was approved by himself. Basically, we 6 months after Ortega was in power, we put up a story on television about a case of extortion. Traffic of influences in the Nicaraguan system of justice is something that everybody talks about every day, but it's very difficult to provide proofs, to provide documents about that. So this time we had somebody who came out in public, and we had a tape about a case of extortion. Basically, they were asking from a businessman $4 million in order to solve his judicial problems so that his project of a tourist resort in the Pacific coast will go ahead. He came out and he denounced that in public.
Who was asking him for this $4 million?
A former congressman from Ortega, and it took him to start this negotiation to the presidential office. The presidential office is not it's not based in the presidential palace, it's based on the party office, which is the first error that Daniel Ortega did when he came back to power. Instead of establishing as a normal president his office in a public building, he never left the party office. So when you go to the party office, it is the presidential office, and this is what this guy did. So what was this government result? They came out with this accusation that the businessman, my source, and myself, and another man, a congressman, that we were part of a sort of conspiracy group, that we were enemies of the peasants that had a conflict with this tourism business, but that we were sort of suspect of being involved in drug trafficking, because in this tourism resort, they have seen helicopters and rapid boats that used to get there, and some suspicious people being either Mexican or Honduras. This is what the guy said, the guy who organized the extortion, but he said what he said on television first. And he said that they have seen me with the other people getting together. And I said, this is crazy, but 3 days later, the President of the Republic, Daniel Ortega, when he's asked, are you going to investigate the scandal of Tola, that's what he was called because he knew the place, he said, yes, I have given orders to the police and to the public ministry to investigate the use of the drug cartels of all the projects of tourism in the Pacific coast. And from then on, every day on television, you will see my picture and the picture of the other people saying, wanted, they're related with drug trafficking, this and that, etc., etc. This lasted 4 months, and it was the beginning of a campaign of confrontation against the press that doesn't involve any legal means, no legal, I didn't face any trial, but it's a campaign of intimidation, so that you go back, you step back, or go into self-censorship and this kind of thing. This was like the first round.
Could you sue?
That's what my wife told me. I said, no, my love, you're wrong. I mean, if I do that, you're playing their game. I will go to their tribunals and I will be guilty. My source, he was condemned for defamation. That's to play their game, and that's what they want.
So what happened next?
Well, this is my individual experience, but this was repeated with other journalists, with La Prensa, with Nuevo Diario, with different TV channels. Some business people from the press retreated because of the government pressure, like Channel 2. They took out of the air a political commentator that was very confrontative with the government because they were afraid of losing their license to operate. Now, the next year, we faced a second campaign. This was mostly directed against non-governmental organizations, social movements, because of Cinco, this research center that I'm the head of the board. Cinco has Cinco organized a project with the women movement that is fighting in Nicaragua against the penalization of therapeutical abortion, which is something that Ortega promoted before his election in order to win the support of the church, the Catholic Church, for his election in 2006. So we had this agreement completely, on the table based on money that that comes from the European Union or from different European donors managed by Oxfam in Nicaragua. And then from one day to the other, the government said, this is money laundering, this is corruption, this is triangulación, because a non-governmental organization that has juridical status is working with another one that doesn't exist, because the social movement doesn't have juridical identification. It was completely crazy. And it lasted for 3 months until they raided our office with about 40 police members and in both industry. They came in at 6 o'clock in the morning, left at 9:30 at night, 13 hours. They took 15,000 folios of paper, 5 computers, different pieces of information, personal, political, accountable. Apparently, they just wanted to look at our books. And then 3 months later, they came out with this declaration saying that they didn't have proof. They didn't have proof to take us to a trial. So there was never a criminal accusation.
One of the things that always strikes me, my memory of reporting in Central America, is that the absence of the judicial system is so complete, justice is so totally arbitrary, that it's very hard to pin down what's actually happening to you, because the accusations are so groundless that it's hard to even follow them or counter them. And before you know it, you're sort of fighting with shadows, because it's hard to even explain what it is that is being done against you. To have seen that Carlos Fernando Chamorro was being accused of money laundering and drug trafficking was so absurd, and yet there was no way to counter this charge. In this whole year of turmoil, one of the more notable things that you did was to interview Daniel Ortega's brother, Humberto Ortega. Humberto Ortega was the military strategist for the Sandinista victory in 1979. He is a very brilliant man who then became head of the army and was head of the army until 1993. When under Guillermo Chamorro's request or demand, he left the army and then moved to Costa Rica and became a very rich businessman. And the head of the army, he learned to keep his mouth shut. He's always understood the importance of keeping his mouth shut. And then, in the context of this turmoil, what is happening to Carlos Fernando, of the direct attack by Daniel Ortega against Carlos Fernando, Humberto Ortega asks you to interview him, perhaps?
Yeah.
How did I guess that? And
the excuse was the 30th anniversary of the Army. And it's a great question because it allows me to introduce another issue, which is the Army and the police. The Army and the police in Nicaragua are the most successful examples of our political transition. I mean, these two institutions that came out, that were born out of the guerrilla movement, became institutionalized by the Frente in power in the 80s. They survived the transition basically through a process of, how do you say, departidization, professionalization, and became no longer the army of the FSLN or the police of the FSLN, but the national army and the national police, and are the most respected institution of the Nicaraguan state. It's proved in all the polls. Now, when Ortega comes back to power, when Daniel comes back to power in 2006, basically he's trying to appeal to the chief of the police and the army, like in the old days in the 80s, like if they had some kind of party alliance to him. And these institutions are much more devoted now to the law. So when people in Nicaragua, when the opposition tried to organize to protest against Ortega or against the electoral fraud, then you face repression in the streets. But the repression is not directed by the army or the police. The repression is organized by mobs, by organized shops, fuerza de choque. Shock troops. And the police receives order from the president of the republic not to intervene. Just let these people, repress the others. So the one of the key problems in Nicaragua today is what's going to happen to the police. We have the best standards of public safety of the rest of Central America. And what we saw last year during the crisis, the electoral crisis, that the FSLN was sort of recruiting and paying people from pandillas, from the barrios, not maras, because we don't have maras, but pandillas, gangs, so that they will be part of their activities to go and fight with other people. Ortega's main concern was about what's going to happen with the army, and he wanted to talk about the army, about the process of transition in the leadership of the army that has to take Humberto. That has to take place in December this year. The chief of the army, a new chief of the army has to be appointed by the president. And Ortega, Humberto, wanted to make this public declaration because he's the founder of the army in the 80s. And he wanted to make it very public that he wants the army to be preserved under this constitutional, institutional direction and not to become a party army like what it used to be. But at the same time, he talked about the police, which was even more important, because at one point he said in the interview, nobody can exercise power without limitations. We need to impose limitations on the exercise of power. And if the other elements of power, like the Court of Justice or the Electoral Council doesn't work, then people has to impose those limitations protesting and coming out to the street. And this was a tremendous declaration. 3 days later, Daniel Ortega had to make a speech on the anniversary of the police, and he referred to his brother without mentioning his name, but he basically quoted. He repeated the quote of what Humberto has told me in the interview, and he called him a traitor.
Really?
Yeah. Well, he said that now we are facing attacks from traitors of all kinds that have become allies of the oligarchy because they're part of the, what do you call it, the dictadura mediática and all this.
Including my brother.
No, he didn't say including my brother, but what he quoted were the words that Humberto Ortega has said in public.
So those of us watching from outside thought the entire thing was remarkable. Here is a country where the president is trying to stay in power through the most arbitrary and unconstitutional means, by attacking the press, by attacking Fernando Chamorro, son of the hero Pedro Joaquin Chamorro, and himself a former leading Sandinista and director of the official Sandinista newspaper. And he is attacking him as if he were the enemy and if he was in drug trafficking. And in this context, Daniel Ortega's brother calls for people to come out into the street to protest what the president, his brother, is doing. And 3 days later, his brother gives a press conference and says, we are being attacked by everyone, including my brother, who is a traitor. That was the sentence. So is Humberto Ortega going to run for the president?
No. Humberto Ortega wants to be, as many other prominent former Sandinistas, they want to be there in the moment there is a crisis, in order to be taken into consideration, to have credibility, and to intervene. There are some other people like Nicho Parenco, former mayor of Managua. Probably he was on the presidential succession with Ortega. Rosario excluded him. He's the most popular Sandinista leader in the country, completely outside the party, but he's waiting for a moment.
Time is racing by, and we have to stop. We would have to stop anyway because it's time, and we do want to leave a little room for questions. We understand it is late. You have been here, some of you, a long time, and certainly Fernando has been very patient throughout this whole afternoon. But Dave, you want to choose, or we just choose and point to?
You can call on people. Do we need a microphone for the questions, or could you?
I think we should just get
I would only request you not to speak too fast so that I can get all the questions.
1, 2, 3.
Thanks, what distinguishes the 3 sectors of the liberales of the opposition, as you described them, the 8% to 23%, and why? Following, why do you think there isn't sort of a cohesive factor not to say in so many words, a cohesive factor, especially being a person, right now, like, why isn't there like sort of a person to counter Ortega's like immense sort of presence? Why isn't there one now? Why wasn't there ever really one?
I think the main problem has been the contamination of politics with corruption, because one of these three sectors is still related with Arnold Alemán. We used to talk in Nicaragua a lot, not only about bipartidarism, but bicaudillism. And Alemán and Ortega, who for some period were very much influential, controlling the state, Alemán is part of the problem. Well, the Liberal Party, which is center-right, it has a very corrupt tendency and some kind of a more modern sort of pro-business tendency. Alemán represents the traditional tendency. The people from the center-left and the people from the center-right have a lot of difficulties getting together with Alemán. Because if you get together with Alemán, some sectors of the electorate will alienate from that. The Nicaraguan electorate is mostly integrated by independents, people who say, I don't belong to any party. And this is what they have to face now. This is the dilemma that they have to deal with now and in the next future. Is it possible to integrate everybody? Is Alemán is going to be part of this National Democratic Alliance, knowing everybody that Alemán is not democratic and is corrupted? Can you exclude him? Well, if you exclude him, you're putting out about 15 to 18% of the electorate. That is the problem, and Ortega has been extremely instrumental and extremely, habilidoso, skillful to manipulate with this kind of things. Alemán and Ortega need themselves. So when Ortega sees that they need each other, so he produces incentives so that Alemán will become the leader of the opposition, so that the other people will say, no, we don't go together. Now, beyond that, there's a big problem in Nicaragua, and we interviewed last Sunday in my TV program young people who are in their 20s and in their 30s, and they said, well, we don't want a leader, we want a program, we want people who make proposals about what will be the future of Nicaragua beyond Ortega. Not only people who will oppose him, but some ideas about proposals, and there are very few.
I was wondering if you would talk a little bit more about the full abortion ban that was passed recently in Nicaragua. I know that it's had quite a reaction in human rights groups in the United States. They're calling it torture. And you said that it was an effort to align itself with the Catholic Church. And I'm wondering, won't that hurt his chances for re-election within the populace?
Well, our legislation established these therapeutical abortions since the beginning of last century, and basically says that when a woman pregnant is under threat or problems, there must be a medical commission that will decide about abortion. This is basically what Ortega eliminated before elections and then when he was in power. The Catholic Church supported that, because the Catholic Church has a pro-life position, very traditional, and the argument was that this therapeutical abortion is used as an excuse for massive abortion. This was the basic argument of the Church. Now, how does the electorate behave with that? Did that have an influence on the election? Not at all. Not at all. Ortega won 38% of the vote. He didn't get more votes for allying with the Church. What he did was to sort of neutralize the criticism of the Church against him. And now the Catholic Church is become very critical of Ortega, because they are denouncing authoritarianism, they are denouncing the situation of poverty, they are denouncing the electoral fraud. Now, if you ask people in Nicaragua their opinions about abortion, and I've been a supporter of therapeutical abortion, and I've been a supporter of the women's movement, the majority of the population will say no abortion at all. So Ortega is playing and manipulating, popular traditional values. Now, I don't think that will have an incidence or an impact in politics or in the electorate. And the Church now is making a distinction. And they say, yes, we are against abortion, but we're criticizing the government on all these issues. Amnesty International, we interviewed a representative of Amnesty International recently, and they said this is a violation of human rights. And there's a big international campaign that is affecting Ortega, mostly his relationship with the European Union because of the banning of abortion.
And that affects his relationship with foreign aid.
Yes, although it was like one of several aspects, but the one that affected him more was the electoral fraud of last year.
So when you're telling your story, I felt like you were telling the story of those real people. I'm representando ciudad. Y cuando habla de Ortega, siento como que está hablando de Mercelaya. When you talk about the Ortega, then there's something about Mercelaya and also the same thing to conclusion. Our Congress expelled the president, and I mean basically pulled the coup, which personally I do not agree with. It has had harmful consequences on our country and our election of the president November 5. Many other countries that basically live off of in terms of foreign aid and commerce. What do you suggest? What is the solution for the Central American people, for the Latin American people, como en Ecuador, como en Bolivia, como en Venezuela, que no tenemos estos líderes políticos, estamos cansados de las cosas? Si hacemos un golpe de Estado, nos pueden ayudar. Si no lo hacemos, nos quedamos con estos dictadores. ¿Qué podemos hacer? What can we do to solve it?
I don't think coup d'etats are a solution for anyone because it's an arbitrary decision, and coup d'etat means taking back the military to take decisions in politics. I mean, civilians have to solve these things. They may have constitutional ways of solving it. Elections do not solve everything, but are better than not having elections. And I think people, well, why? It's a big question, and I don't have all the answers. But I think there is something that is not working well. Well, in Venezuela there was a collapse of the system of political parties. In Bolivia it's something different. There was the emergence of the social movement. In Ecuador it's something probably in the middle. In Nicaragua, as I explained before, it's something different. I think Zelaya is different. But I don't think there are easy solutions. But coup d'etat, I don't really think it's a solution at all.
The Chavez and Ecuador didn't have very bad press in the U.S. And in the U.S. there were a lot of people who were afraid of the renewed, the leftist terror. And the story you tell about Pedro Ortega and Nicaragua obviously contradicts the reality of that myth. Because there's no conspiracy, there's not a bunch of communists taking over. Do you think that the grotesque way in which Daniel Ortega is running Nicaragua now could have in the future a beneficial effect on the way the U.S. media portrays the situation in Latin America today?
I don't think people are paying more. I don't think the press is paying much attention to Ortega. But I think there is a basic understanding that there is a difference between Ortega, Chavez, Correa, Morales, although they get together in the pictures and they repeat more or less the same rhetoric. I think the case of Nicaragua is more an issue of a threat to democracy, a question of whether the country will be viable, sustainable in economic terms, a problem of corruption. Now, will that have an impact on the view of the rest of the other presidents? I don't think so. See the documentary that Oliver Stone put together. He doesn't say a word about Ortega. I don't think Ortega is taken seriously. Well, that's my impression. Alma, you have a look from here, but I don't think Ortega is taken seriously by the press.
My impression is that it is not the moment for the United States to look at Central America and say, oh my God, we have a vast communist conspiracy, we need another domino theory, we need to stage another cultural war. I don't think that's in the works. And so as long as that is not an objective then I don't think that there is the kind of drum roll to project Ortega as some kind of threat or even some kind of plot. What do we know about Ortega?
You just one anecdote about Honduras. 3 days ago, Ortega is in Cochabamba in a meeting with Alma, and he takes the microphone and starts saying that he talked with Shannon, with the other. I talked to Tom Shannon, and I told Tom Shannon that the Honduras resistance is looking for weapons in Nicaragua and in El Salvador and Guatemala, and they're trying to organize because they have the right to fight in other means, etc., etc. You know, the day after, the representative of Celaya said, "We're not doing that." We're not doing that. I don't know why Ortega is saying that. But that's Ortega. It's over rhetoric.
Reading Humberto Ortega was suggesting that the police could be a limitation on power, and or could a president ever be successful in swaying the police to become party line like Daniel Ortega originally tried to?
No, I don't think. I don't think the point was that the police will limit the power of the president. But he was talking about that civil society, the population, that youth people, by demonstrating or by organizing an opposition, would put a limit to the abuse of power. But the concern about the police is to preserve the police as a trustable institution, because let me put it this way, I have been under threat attacked by Ortega, and I know the head of the Nicaraguan police is a very respectable woman, who is a former guerrilla, is a former nun, a former nun, who became a guerrilla in 78, 79, who has made a career in the Ministerio del Interior and then in the police. The most respected Nicaraguan individual in the polls. Amita Granera will get 78% of popularity. Ortega hates her because she's really she's a potential president. She's a potential politician. I mean, what will she do when she leaves the police? Everybody's asking that question. But I trust her, and I trust the rest of the people that is working with her. Now, if tomorrow she will be dismissed and Ortega will appoint, and this is not a joke, Ortega wants to appoint his, ¿cómo se dice? Su compadre, there's, Paquito Diaz is the father of one of Ortega's son is married with the daughter of this policeman, and Ortega already promoted him. The problem is this: if in a society like Nicaragua people don't trust police, people will decide to make justice on its own hands, and people will look at ways of harming yourself and not trusting the police. But there is a lot of polarization about the press in Nicaragua. And one of the temptations that we're trying to not to fall into that every day is not to become ourselves journalists, the opposition, not to substitute the political parties the way some of the TV networks in Venezuela have done. I try every day. I try to say, okay, the government is my enemy. They're attacking me, but I try to do good journalism every day. And it's very difficult because all the sources are blocked. I don't have access to anyone from the government. It's completely forbidden to talk with independent press. But I talk for myself. The rest of my colleagues, they do have different ways of facing this kind of situation. And the government is polarizing the situation in the sense that now they are organizing. They were organizing journalists under party bases. Trying to promote some kind of rebellion, I think, within the newsrooms of the independent press, something that I don't think will ever happen. The media, in the what we call the ranking of credibility of institutions in Nicaragua, the last poll, there was also a competition between the army, the church, and the media. The media used to be number one. The last poll, army number one, media number two, with 5 points difference, and then the church. So, even though the government has been very confrontative with the media is still credible. The media is highly credible, let me put it this way.
Going on just your last point, And yeah, do you see yourself following your mother's footsteps, going into the political arena? You may tend to represent the antithesis of corruption in some regard, since you've done a lot of work investigating into. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I have been asked that question recently, the previous month. The moment you get some kind of visibility and international attention, people say, "Oh, he wants to be president. He's starting his campaign." Probably people will say, "Well, now that I'm here in Chicago, part of my, international campaign." But let me put it this way. I mean, my own personality, it's not something that I want to do, to be in politics or to campaign or this kind of thing. I really try to believe that what I'm doing as a journalist is important and it's influential, and I will try to keep doing that, because the other option for me is not an option. Now, having said that, you can never know exactly what's going to happen with your life. Okay, I never wanted to be a journalist. I ended up being a journalist. Now, will I get into politics? My answer is no, but I don't know. We'll see the example of my colleague Mauricio Funes in El Salvador. Okay, Mauricio Funes became elected president. So people say, "Oh, you are the Mauricio Funes from Nicaragua." But Mauricio Funes became president in El Salvador because he made an alliance with a major political party, which is the FMLN. Mauricio Funes alone will never be president of El Salvador. The FMLN will never be in power without Mauricio Funes.
However, you did say in a recent interview, a very popular interview in El País, that history picks you up and makes decisions for you.
This was the summary that this journalist made of a long conversation.
You know that you shouldn't be trusting journalists. You know that you shouldn't trust the journalists.
Yes, I'm very careful. I like to ask questions, not to answer.
There was another, yes.
I don't know how fair it is to ask you to speak for your entire country, but with that said, I'm left sort of curious as to what the general feeling about the possibility for change through politics or change through democracy is in Nicaragua today, or if not through democracy, then by what means can change be effected?
I think large sectors of the population are not much concerned about that. They're concerned about economic survival. And that's an explanation why they don't get involved into politics. They have to leave. I mean, their main problem is, am I going to get a job today? I'm going to have food at home, and whether to migrate or not, and how to do that. So I think the issue of democracy and the issue in general, people tend to be, inclined to say, okay, we like tolerance, we like democratic rights, but there's no connection between democracy and real, daily life in terms of people are expecting results from democracy in terms of economic and social policies. And I think, with some exceptions in Latin America, democracy is failing in providing those results. Now, how do you attain democracy? Well, electoral competition is important, popular participation, citizen participation, it's instrumental, it's important, but I don't think you can exclude one for the other. When I hear people talking about direct democracy, I get suspicious about how that is going to be organized.
You said that this whole attack on the Constitution is that most likely that's only from inside the country. What would be the next step for dealing with this, for keeping the country from sliding on a slippery slope?
In legal terms, the president of Nicaragua said yesterday, this is the decision. The Supreme Electoral Council said, this is not, you cannot appeal. So apparently in legal terms, because they do control all the apparatus, there's nothing to do. The only thing I expect is that, there might be a combination between people who are angered because this assault on the Constitution and democracy, and people who are angered because of the new proposal of the government of imposing a tax reform. which is something that is in Parliament these days. Unless there is a connection between social and economic issues and these political problems, I won't see people in Nicaragua with strong political mobilization. But what I'm trying to say is, I mean, I'm mad with Nicaraguan politicians because they tend to repeat this traditional view that we have that our problems are solved in the States. But not so much these days in Obama's office, but in the OAS, and appealing to the international community to solve our problems. And I think the international community is a bit tired of Nicaragua. They say, you have to solve your problems. And when they ask us this question about, so what happened with the Nicaraguan opposition? Well, the Nicaraguan opposition is a fraud. So unless the Nicaraguan opposition gets organized and reacts against this Ortega's challenge, nothing will change.
30 years later, what's left of the Nicaraguan revolution? Queda algo de la revolución nicaragüense? I mean, what can you say? You were there at the beginning, you've been intimately connected to it. What do we say? Is it all a sort of a story of failure, or what can you say for it?
Well, if you ask the people who are in power today, they will tell you that the revolution is back and that we are going through the second stage of the revolution. I think what is left of the revolution is a feeling of empowerment. I think that's an important subjective change in terms of the capability of the Nicaraguan people to organize themselves, to demand, to promote their rights. That's a distinction between Nicaragua and other countries that never went through a revolution. Now, there are some institutional legacies. I mentioned the army and the police. Well, they're not creatures of the revolution all the way around. They went through the transition, but people associate the army and the police as sort of the legacy of the revolution also. And the FSLN is a creature also of that period, and now I think it's an element of division in Nicaragua. But I think if you ask a Nicaraguan common citizen about the revolution, he will tend to associate the revolution with the FSLN because it's a political party that has been administering the symbols of the revolution of '79.
I want to thank Mr. Chamorro and Professor Guillermoprieto again for letting us share this conversation.